Thank you to Martin, Andy and Derek. You've given some really good insights there. Do you have any particular questions you'd like to pose to the panel as a whole to try and get different views, try and get the debate started? Gentleman back there.
Yes, in your initial presentation you mentioned new types of data and big data. My personal view is that there's not really any new types of data, there's more data, and there's data types that we didn't have the tools or technologies to analyse before. So from a panel perspective, do you think that's the case? Is it hype, or is there real value there that we can look at?
Who'd like to go first on that?
Well, should I start with that? So I think they are, when I say they're new types, I mean, if you go right at the back, you could say data is data, but there's a very structured form of data. You know, that's the history of IT. It's very, very structured, codified forms with classifications and fixed length fields and all the rest of it. So that's one way of looking at data. The next big way seemed to be about relating that data in clever ways. And it became much more about relational databases. That seemed to be the big kind of innovation. That's morphed very much now into actually that structure and all the rest of it tends to be quite limiting. And there's much more of an emphasis now on being able to find things and discover things in a way that isn't predefined through structures at a design stage. So that's kind of in the background from a traditional IT perspective. All I'm saying is there's a lot more sources for data that are coming through, and they're providing data that's perhaps slightly different and provides new possibilities. So the fact that we suddenly have the capability of geographical information coming through from mobile devices which are geo-positioned and things like that creates new possibilities of relating different data elements to each other. With time stamping, you've then got a time dimension. So in a sense, all I'm saying is you can create more structures of information or data that just haven't really been that easy to do in the past. You're also then potentially looking at less traditionally structured data. So if you're looking at images, I mean, images, for instance, are a different form of data, and it's only now slowly emerging that you can actually do searches on that kind of data using new tools that are slowly emerging around facial recognition and so on. So all I'm saying is these present slightly different challenges. The volumes involved in data files and sound files and so on are significant compared to all codified data. I mean, I was just struck by the size differentials in the new types of data that are coming through versus what we used to work with 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, your entire IBM mainframe data would probably now fit on a memory stick. That's the order.
Probably fit on here.
Exactly. So there's something about order of magnitude differences in terms of some of the processing challenges, some of the relational opportunities and so on. And then when you're into unstructured data, that presents different semantic challenges. It does also provide new forms of data. So for instance, Facebook data, which is very relationally focused on people's relationships, those are dimensions that we've just never, in traditional customer databases, you didn't have fields for, how this particular customer was related to other customers in your database, either as a friend or. So all I'm saying is that picture is becoming much more pluralistic, complex, rich. There are a couple of different sort of angles to it, and you just add to that sensor data and all sorts of things.
Just one comment on that from our point of view. The real world where tube lines is looking also ahead, or underground is looking ahead around predictive, very, very key. And I know it's been mentioned a few times. There's a couple of slides that I think are in the pack of all the stats and that around the amount of integration into sensors and predictive analytics, etc. So for us, that's where we need to head. But again, that's because there's a strategy around it. We have to be better. So again, it's strategic in respect of how we govern that as well. So at the moment we're writing papers on the governance, but then how it affects the organisation, how we select all these pieces, who does what across the organisation and company, and then the roles that people have got to play in this as well. Because it can't just be all this data for data's sake, whereas again, you just got to fundamentally ask the question of why. We're asking that question again all the time, we're asking it, but we've moved into predictive. we are trying to set the organisation up around it, understand what we want as outputs, and then obviously look at the processes around that and the integrations.
Yeah, no, I'd agree entirely. I mean, I think one thing is the volume of data. We mentioned earlier that modern control systems have far more data that they can actually provide. My car broke down the other day. The guy comes in with a computer, runs something for a couple of minutes, and then says, "Yeah, that sensor down there's failed." Totally changed the way in which you would actually diagnose what is wrong with the car. So there's a massive shift with the volume of data that is now available coming from a structured source. But I think you're right as well, Martin, as you move into the unstructured arena, not only with Facebook, there are things like the relationships that you can begin to explore, but actually you've got the opinions that are being expressed. You can actually work out what are the opinions being expressed about my company. You can go and search for that, and you can get opinions and get understanding of what people are saying without necessarily doing the old-fashioned way of going and asking the questionnaire. So I think there are lots of aspects that are very, very different, and there's tools coming out that I don't really understand that enable us to begin to analyse some of the...
I think what's interesting about that is, the challenge that you mentioned earlier about two different parts of the same organisation speaking different languages. When you get to the semantic world of opinions being expressed, that just gets multiplied.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I think Robin wanted to make a point.
I'd challenge you on image recognition and image manipulation. I'll probably go back as far as you in the 30 years ago we were doing mineral exploration and all sorts of analytics in there. It's the same sort of data. When we look at relational databases, data in itself doesn't make any sense unless it has some sort of relationship and context. The big data bit, I think, from our perspective, which is far more important, is the unstructured, the ether, the plethora of opinion. And where that becomes, for me, very interesting is how long, and it's a temporal thing, probably something that we haven't touched on, is relevance in time. Is when somebody makes a statement about, oh, the Jubilee line is rubbish and it has been for the last 10 years, do we treat that as serious? Do we treat that as, what's the context and everything that goes around that? And actually, it was only rubbish and damaging because their partner didn't manage to get through the doors, and that bit is only that long, so there's that sort of whole contextual thing. So, in some ways, the big baggage thing of big data, and your car probably has a USB that tells you all that information, so it's still not big baggage, is, do we really need that big baggage? Is it an industry, IT industry created thing that you need more space for this stuff? Or is it that actually we still aren't aware of how long we need to keep things? We're hoarders. We store things and manage it and say it's got to be archived for 50 years, where actually it should be just thrown out after 2 seconds. There's a lot.
Yeah, you could have a sceptical view that says that the cost of storage has actually dropped through the floor over the years, and therefore what does the IT industry need to do is to actually put more data in to fill it back up and sell more of it. That would be a sceptical view. Or even a cynical view.
I don't know. If you speak to the statisticians in the real, true big data areas, and I don't think BI is necessarily a true big data kind of problem, but they create vast amounts of data, and in fact they need that to be able to do the kind of statistical inferencing that's required to make it valid and so on. So, I know Joe's been doing some work with Rolls-Royce, for instance, and they've changed their whole business model around the fact that they actually provide a full service capability to engines. So you don't buy an engine, you buy a Rolls-Royce contract to provide an engine. And the amount of data that they actually produce and monitor on engine performance on all the engines they sell is just astronomical. And in fact, so much so that they're sitting with the same problems you are now about, well, do we sit on this data? And it's not because of cost. They could quite happily sit on the cost data. They're more concerned about the compliance challenges, about the fact that they've got this data, they could have interrogated this data, and they don't want to be in a call sum stage where it's discoverable. And in fact, they were asked the question, well, why didn't you run that particular query? Why didn't you do that kind of data? Now, that's actually what they're concerned about. And what I'm concerned about, almost from an academic perspective, is that they decided actually for fear of that, they decide to delete the data, when in fact, they would probably be able to create quite neat data opportunities to go and do some analysis in due course, but if they delete that data for fear of it being turned against them, my suggestion to them would be that they'd rather rationally defend why it is that they're only going to be able to ask certain sets of questions and defend it that way rather than simply get rid of data sets. I mean, Google's quite clearly at the other end of this extreme where they're looking to create as much digital data as possible. They do not know what they're going to do with it, but they are absolutely confident that that will pay for itself because of the data storage costs just coming down so significantly.
I think there's another element that goes with that in terms of one of the things that we're beginning to use in some areas is things around training and actually using video data. So instead of giving manuals, actually, I mean, you can see it already on YouTube, not just us. I bought something the other day and I got the manual out for it and my eyes glazed over. And a friend said, no, have a look on YouTube, put this in, and up comes a video of how to drive it. All of a sudden I could understand it really easily. So actually there's the whole visualization of things, plant assets or whatever we're working on, actually as that gets into video data, that itself goes a completely different step forward. And the potential value of that in terms of training and keeping people up to date on new developments or whatever is massive.
And it's more about, you were saying, it's not so much searching that kind of information necessarily, it's the fact that you have choices to make there about what data is going to be the most useful in your particular environment. So for training, maybe it's the video clip.
Yeah.
For insurance companies, rather than getting a description of you may want the photo.
Yeah.
I found that quite interesting in terms of the reporting example earlier, because actually everyone immediately, after columns and columns of data, when the actual snapshot of the thing came out, it was immediately apparent. Yes. And that's the kind of thing that I think there are going to be more of those choices available going forward. They are going to throw up different technical challenges. If you suddenly have to add that to your database, you need a different kind of database performance potentially, or you need to kind of think about different design considerations. So that's
design, there's structures, imagery might be fold-based as opposed to database and those sort of things. But it's, as I say, for me it's the temporal element which is quite a significant part of the
Absolutely. That is. That does magnify your, that just adds another whole dimension to the complexity.
Next question.
I just found big data. I think there's two big data. So you've got big data as in general Google actually want to store a lot. I'm seeing another bit with HP. It's actually looking for relationships you don't even know or expect to exist in data. And this is around the data mining side, I suppose, big data. And we're seeing it more and more with working with things like Kubernetes in America, and looking for actually relationships between process data, which we never really expect to exist, and get, those two acting together, but why? And it's, I think, say, IT, BI big data, well, from my point of view anyway, is possibly more looking at that relationships where you have massive volumes of data, which you've never processed before, and you get something out of it.
I think this is an interesting area. It's come up recently in some discussions because in some cases it's about discovering new relationships and new correlations which are unexpected and surprising, and that's one kind of problem. And I think that's where some of these algorithms that try and cross-correlate for you and all the rest of it and throw things up are really useful because they often process data just much more quickly than we could as humans. But what is different and quite interesting though is ways of exploring data and using human pattern recognition because it's more effective potentially than the algorithmic variety. And this is often where the relationships are quite established, but that's not the issue. The issue is you want to see the patterns in the relationships of those. So in other words, and this could be particularly true if you're dealing with data that can be either layered on top of a physical relationship. So I think the value of things like GIS systems and then giving it a safety overlay and then giving it a people overlay and giving it and building these things up so that you can actually, that the map is the route in for a person, but actually it's the correlation between the fact that actually that safety incident happened there, actually there was a failure in the maintenance the month before there, or you can see the clustering immediately on a visual level without any need for anything else. It's just a way of actually kind of presenting the data and exploring if it might be
I think the example
Yeah,
Andy
that's-
gave where you got the track and the station,
Yes,
you know, and you've got all the hotspots.
Yeah.
If you position that in a table, you wouldn't, you know, you'd miss a massive amount. As soon as you overlaid it on a geospatial representation, you know, diagram, yeah, wow, you can see it just sprang out the page at you.
And getting to the temporal point, if you then actually time shifted that picture,
Yes, exactly.
you could actually see that actually underspend on maintenance has actually meant that there have been more and more failures, or
Yeah.
you could do lots of things just over a period. So I think those kind of visualization techniques and layering techniques are often a way of actually dealing with information that does have established relationships, but just allows you to explore them and play around with them quite powerfully.
Robin?
Going on from that, the question to the panel is context of that data, socialising that raw data to the things like through London Data Store to people that can utilise it and can create those GIS layers or other layers or other forms. What do you perceive as the biggest benefits and what do you perceive as the biggest risks?
So I was talking about risk, just from experience around, there is quite a large risk because some of the stuff is obviously around standards and compliance, and if it's misunderstood, it can cause perception issues in respect of make it on the news. Recently we had some that made it on the news, reports were leaked, and the reports that whoever leaked them, they misunderstood, and when they're in the wrong hands, they don't understand the detail of them, they can be really misunderstood. So basically what it sends alarm bells around the safety of the actual of the line. And it was on the 6 o'clock news because people didn't understand the way the priorities and all the standards that were built in them, and they were for select user group. So there's a major risk around certain things, and actually controlling that is getting more and more difficult as we widen the net to actually push these reports out to people, and people want more information. So that's that is a high risk. On the benefit side, just for us in that, it's actually looking at some of the things that, all the different people involved in the operation and the interoperability around different organisations utilising the information. That is for us is huge, especially around the GIS stuff and that, how we can share all that kind of information. So for me, the risk is really big, and it's something that we've had to deal with. Just very watermarking reports and that, so we understand basically where they are, etc. Because that's safety critical areas.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an area I've really thought about a lot, but I can't help thinking that the biggest opportunities always have the flip side. So I'd start for looking at the flip sides of everything, and in a sense, I think these things are going to actually potentially play havoc with quite a lot of business models, especially if the business models are fundamentally predicated on having an information or a data asymmetry. And where this for companies in particular, I think, is going to play out is if you are able to charge disproportionately from a price perspective because your customers don't understand that there's a competing product that's cheaper, or they just don't have as good an understanding of the level of risk or whatever it might be. Anything where data gives you or information gives you an advantage in the negotiation or a price setting situation or something like that, you could be exposed if other competitors come in and actually make that much more transparent because the data is more available. So I just think that whole information landscape, it doesn't come up at all at the moment in the IS strategy literature. That's one of my postdoc sort of areas to look at. Is we don't talk in IT strategy terms as CIOs or anything like that about what are the information asymmetries or the data asymmetries that this whole business model is predicated on. Is it about having much better insights about customers, in which case actually we need to be on top of all this new sort of data, because if we aren't, other competitors could be, and may undermine our business model. If it's about supplier relationships, is there anything about data that's suddenly available that actually means that could be compromised? So I'm not quite sure exactly how to play out, but I think we need to pay a lot more attention to who's got the data. I mean, the clearest example is normally in the financial sector, where, I'm very surprised because I think it's also going to come up in the compliance side of things as well. I've been fundamentally surprised that regulators have been would in any other case, if you were talking about a traded asset on an exchange, be considered insider trading. So the fact that investment banks can trade in a market that they've made, I just think is fundamentally flawed for that reason, because they can see the buyers, they can see the sellers, and they can then intervene in the market to suit themselves because they see both sides of that in a way that you wouldn't be able to do that in an exchange environment, because that would be seen as insider trading. So I think it's going to make us much more aware of these kind of information asymmetries. If you look at inside an organisation, that's also interesting because it's often related to power. The person who actually produces the information is powerful. So traditionally, this has meant, I think, why finance directors and the finance community have been so powerful in organisations. Because when it comes to performance information, which is what we're looking at today, they've traditionally been the arbiters of what represents performance information if it's financial. They've been therefore very, very powerful. What I've been surprised at is that you've seen organisations try, from other marketing functions or whatever, to try and bring their own set of management data, and that, with varying degrees of success. And very often you get into this whole debate about, do you have one version of the truth then? And then the question is, whose version of the truth? And I can't help thinking that there's a huge opportunity potentially for very smart CIOs to become much more than just the pure custodians of data, and to become much more the source of information that isn't perhaps financial. I don't think we're going to be able to kind of get the financial community unentrenched from them. They're a very vital base, but I think there's this idea of, for everything that isn't financial, there's IS effectively, and being much more sussed about that kind of information dynamics, I expect might be a trend.
I agree with Andy. I think misinterpretation of information. You could look at something and say, how many faults have you got on your network? You shouldn't have faults on your network. Well, of course you do. If you've got a big bunch of assets, some of them at any stage are going to have faults. We manage the critical faults very differently to the non-critical faults, but the data is open to misinterpretation. So I think, I agree entirely the risks that go there. Equally, this morning, I wanted to check what was the situation on the tubes. So I pulled up the iPad, I pulled out an app on there which is nothing to do with tube lines or TfL. It was some company, don't quite know how they make money, but what did they do? They were tapping in real time to the status of the information that has been delivered by London Underground, or wherever it actually comes from, that was saying these are the condition of the tube. Critical delay on, I think it was Central Line, wasn't it? There was a signalling problem somewhere. So from that point of view, that's made available by you, but it's not your website or your app that I went to. Somebody else was actually then representing that. And they presumably have some way of making money out of that representation. So, very different positions.
Surprisingly, we have a lot of people that don't make money out of those apps.
Yes.
Because they want to do it. And we supply the data feeds to allow them to do it.
Yeah.
I think there are lots of opportunities in the middle of that, though. I mean, increasingly crowdsourcing is coming up as one way of, I think, for instance, the way in which we consider capturing data of customers, increasingly that's moved into online forms and so on. But, they are talking about introducing this idea of almost having your customer wallet type of idea of your own personal data that travels with you. And this idea that people can validate things and correct, incorrect data. And there's a public willingness potentially to do that if there's an interest. And some people are just, happy to do that generally. So you look at something like I think there was just something about the movie database. That's all volunteer driven and so on. I mean, the industry is now using it, but volunteers would be quite happy to actually submit huge amounts of data, but it's been made very easy to do that, and I think it's going to become increasingly easy to do that.
I think some companies take advantage of that. So Google, for instance, for a very period of time, they ran a program where, as you're logging, you had to type in the name of a road that they showed in the picture, which their automatic recognition couldn't identify. So they were using your input to move their data.
Yeah.
Exactly. And even when it comes to faults, you talked about faults. I mean, early warning systems, somebody could just literally, if there's a number to text with an issue, that they could become part of your issue management management system with data and all sorts of
I think there was something a year or so ago, the last time there was a big fuss about potholes in the road, but one of the councils had come up with an app that basically you could take a picture of the pothole in the road, and then it reported back to the council with a geospatial, your location, and that's how they knew where the potholes were, so they didn't have to pay people to go around and inspect.
There's actually a website called Fix My, and there's Fix My
There you go.
Street.
Yeah.
That's where you actually report all of those things in. That is quite a positive way. I mean,
I think there's lots of positives, but as you said, the spin of the positive is the negative, that when it goes out and it's uncontrolled or misinterpreted on the nature of the data. You know, it's a bit like reports in the paper. You know, speak to a reporter or whatever, and they interpret it their way, and he's like, oh, I didn't say that.
In fact, what you're saying on this, you need to become much more media savvy around the fact that this is going to become increasingly visible and transparent.
Okay, so I need to, bearing in mind time, I think we need to draw a close there. I think we can carry on the conversation over a glass of wine, but I appreciate that some people might have trains to catch or need to get away on time. So just like to thank our three speakers.